Yes, all right. Welcome everyone and welcome to this program by Studium Generale. Welcome everyone here in the room and also everyone who is watching online. Welcome to this program by Studium Generale of the Eindhoven University of Technology. And today this program is organized in collaboration with 𝑤𝑒RVIngsdagen, the student organization that is the organizer of the career event here in the auditorium here on campus. Well, who of you already had a good chat with a potential employer today or maybe yesterday? I see some hands going up. Maybe others still have to go, still have to walk around in the expo. Okay. And for the people who raised their hands, who of you had a talk about climate policy with those companies? One hand. Okay. Two hands, yeah. Okay, not that many people. But I think it's maybe an important topic to discuss and maybe also an important and interesting factor when you make a choice for a particular company. Well, today we dive into the world of investing and especially sustainable investing. And our guest speaker of today, Jack Kragt, he will explain why large shareholders play an important role in the transition of non-sustainable industries. Jack Kragt is an associate professor of finance and also lecturer of sustainable finance at the Tilburg School of Economics and Management of the Tilburg University. And he's also a supervisor in the financial sector. And he also worked as a board member of the pension funds ABP and PGGM. Well, is investing in oil and gas the best strategy for companies and organizations if they want to invest for the climate? After the talk of Jack Kragt, there's time for questions, but now please your attention and give him a warm welcome, Jack Kragt.
Well, thank you very much, Gijs, for your kind introduction. So, investing for the climate. What can the financial world do to combat climate change? Basically, that's the issue that I would like to discuss, because we all know, I think, that climate change is going on and that we have to stop it and it needs to be combated. The main culprit of climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, and we rely on the oil industry for our energy resources. This is an oil jack and an oil refinery behind it at the moment, and they are the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. So we have to stop climate change by stopping the huge emissions of greenhouse gases, and that also means to stop the oil and gas business. So for that we need to move into a different type of energy production, clean energy, green energy, and that is, of course, an energy transition. Actually, we've already had two energy transitions before. Up to around 1900, the main source of energy was wood-burning stoves and burning of peat. Peat, for the Dutch speakers, that's turf. So that was the main source of energy up to around 1900, when that role was taken over by coal. So that was the first energy transition. And then oil and gas exploration came up, and around 1960, oil and gas became the biggest energy source. So that was the second energy transition. So we need a third energy transition into clean energy to combat climate change. And that's what this timeline is showing. At the moment, it says here we are at 19% of the energy mix globally that is green, so renewable. And the rest is still mostly fossil. So oil, gas, and coal. And we have to get to around 50% or over 50% preferably in 2050 to make the energy transition happen. So at that point in time, we have the move over into clean energy sources, which is the transition moment, taking it over from mostly fossil fuels. So that energy transition is going to be taking a lot of things that we have to do as a world. This is just an idea. We need many more wind farms. We need many more solar parks. Geothermal needs to be done. We have to get energy from the warmth of the earth. The carbon that still is being emitted needs to be captured. It needs to be stored. We have to do other things that is going to be very important for climate change, which requires a lot of infrastructure, like hydrogen plants. As an energy carrier, we can use hydrogen, and we can, in theory, produce that very energy in a clean energy way. This is a huge undertaking, right? You see these things, and you realize that this is all an enormous infrastructure development. And it is a disruption. It's a disruption of an existing huge industry that we have to go through. So for this disruption to happen, we have to have 4 things. And the disruption means that we have to have the money, a lot of it. We have to have the vision that this needs to happen, and we need to have a view on how it's going to happen. Then thirdly, we need the technical expertise, the know-how, how to do it. And the 4th thing, and that's often underestimated and forgotten in the disruption, we need, how do we go about the uncertainty? How is hydrogen actually going to work? What is the regulation going to be in 10 years' time for solar farms in country A, B, C? Right? So that type of uncertainty we have to deal with as a society. So it's those 4 things that we have to have for this disruption to be, successful. So I want to take a look at a disruption that's already taking place, that's already advancing. As an example, although it's somewhat related, it's not the same, and that's the electrical vehicle disruption. Elon Musk, he's of course very well known as the CEO of Tesla. I want to look at the 4 things for this disruption. So first of all, the money. He was the founder of PayPal, the payment system, and he got very wealthy because of that, and he sold his shares around 20 years ago for about $100 million. So he had the money. He also had the vision. So he had the idea, we have to go away from internal combustion engine cars to electric cars. He had the vision because he felt that that was the only way to get to transport to be clean. He also had the technical expertise because together with other people, he founded the company Tesla, and they started building and developing electrical cars. And the 4th part, the uncertainty about what it meant to have this was, comparatively simple. Will people want to buy electrical cars? How do they behave? Is there a problem perhaps with the range of an electric vehicle? All that they didn't know when they were starting this company around 15, 16 years ago. But it was all available in one hand. Suppose that Elon Musk didn't have that money. Suppose that he didn't have that 100 million from PayPal. Then he would have, perhaps with the same vision of course, he would have to go to investors and convince them, guys, please give me 50 million or so to start up an electric vehicle company. And then if that works, if we can actually develop a good electric car, then a few years from now, I need another few hundred million to build a factory. And I need more to launch it globally. That's the story he would have had to go to an investor with. Because he has the money himself, he doesn't have to have the discussion. He can basically decide upon it himself and do that. He believes in the story, has the money, can do it. So that's why, in this case, if he would not have had the money himself, it's probably happened, it would have worked, but it would have been slower because he would have had to convince a lot of other people. So returning to the energy disruption, the energy transition, is also very beneficial to have those four things in one hand. And who has that? Who has the money, the vision, the know-how, and who can deal with the uncertainty? And basically there is only one type of industry, which is the oil and gas industry. They have those things. I'm going to go through that, right? But these are the firms that we all know, in the Western world at least, right? These are the big oil majors. Well, they're big, yes, but they're not the biggest in the world. Because the biggest oil companies, they are state-owned. There is Petrobras, which is mostly owned by the Brazilian government, Saudi Aramco by Saudi Arabia. There is PDVSA owned by Venezuela, and so on. And of course, there is Rosneft and Gazprom, owned by Russia. These are state-owned oil companies. Are they going to be investing in the climate? Are they going to be making that energy transition happen? What they do is maximize profits for the governments that own them. Some of these companies also have private shareholders, but they are mostly owned and they're certainly controlled by countries, by their governments. And their interest, as I say, is to maximize revenue. So I think, and from the way they behave, you can see that we should not expect from them the main leap forward into clean energy. And that's a pity. This is the world's oil reserves and the world's gas reserves. And the dark green part is the reserves that are owned by those state-owned oil companies, the national oil companies. So as you can see, they own most of the reserves. And the light green here is the major international IOCs, the major international oil companies, which is the list that I just showed. So they have, a significant proportion, but they're actually comparatively small when it comes to the state-owned oil companies' reserves. So we're relying, actually, if we're talking to the oil and gas companies to do their bit in the energy transition, on a comparatively small part of the oil and gas business. There is, however, another motive for the energy transition. This is the laying of a pipe in the Baltic Sea for transporting gas from Russia to Germany, which is the Nord Stream gas pipeline. So it is just an illustration about the dependence that the Western world has on energy that's coming out of countries like Russia, countries like Venezuela, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the rest of the Gulf, China and India. So for the Western world, that's an extra motive to do the energy transition in the first place. Because the war in Ukraine only clearly shows that that is actually very undesirable geopolitically, to have that dependence. So let's return to the ones that we do know, the ones that we can think about and that we can talk to as shareholders and as investors, those oil and gas companies. So do they have the money, the vision? Do they have the expertise? And can they deal with the uncertainty? So when it comes to the money, well, normally when they make a profit, they do three things with it. The first is they use it for developing new oil fields and gas fields. They use it for paying out dividends to their shareholders. And the rest, they sit on it. Well, that's not desirable for any company. So what they do is they actually give it back to shareholders. Also by, well, not also, by buying their shares. Here you see over the last 30 years or so, what they do with the money they don't have a purpose for. They buy back their shares, meaning any company that normally goes to the market for for capital, they sell shares, right? They sell their shares to new investors and they get the money. In this case, they buy their own shares and they give back their money to the shareholders. So they make so much profit that they don't need it for dividends and for their capital investments to develop new oil fields and gas fields. So they just say, okay, well, then let's just buy back my own shares. And investors generally like that. Because if the pile is this big of profitability, but the number of shares is decreasing, because they buy back their own shares, then per share, the amount of profit is going to be increasing, right? So the investors generally like that. But for the climate, they could actually do more in terms of investment in solar farms, wind farms, and so on, the list we just saw, right? So they're not doing as much as they can. This slide just gives you an idea about, how we compare when it comes to the money that is involved. With, on the left-hand side, Aramco with 30 billion of profits in a single quarter, the third quarter of last year. Saudi Aramco, this is the biggest state-owned oil company. This is how big these guys are. They're actually making more profit than a company like Apple, Microsoft, or Google. And then on the right-hand side, you see the oil companies, or a couple of them. They sit around 5-6 billion per quarter or so. But it's still a lot of money, and they can invest, as I said, part of that in clean energy, which they're not at the moment. So yes, they are investing some money in clean energy, but they're not doing it as much as they can. Now, for the oil companies, there is another motive to look at this, which is that many forecasters show that the demand for oil is going to decrease. So in effect, oil and gas is a dying business. So this is a motive for them, and that's part, of course, of the vision that they should have for the disruption to happen. They see, okay, what I'm in, the business I'm in, is not going to be there, on a very long horizon. So they have the money and they have the vision. So how about the technical expertise? Well, it is actually somewhat similar to what they're already doing in the oil and gas business when it comes to the things that you need to do to be a clean energy producer. Things like a hydrogen plant and all the pipes and the infrastructure that you need for that. That's quite similar. So they do have the technical expertise for this kind of thing. The fourth part is dealing with the uncertainty. Is hydrogen going to be, a viable business 20 years from now? Can I invest billions in that? Dealing with the huge potential price swings of that type of energy, that's what they're used to doing. In oil and gas, that happens as well. They have to have big pipes, they transport oil and gas around the world. They have to deal with the regulations in countries around the world. Some of them are unstable, and they're not consistent in the way that they provide regulations. So they're used to that. So you see, in other words, that those four things that are essential for any disruption to be successful are actually available in the oil and gas companies as we know them. So are they doing something? If you look at the home pages of the oil companies I just showed, they all say that they're doing something in sustainability, all of them. Yeah, we're doing this. We're going for sustainability. But they're not doing enough. They can do more. And they can also stop talking about talking to governments to slow down climate regulations and lobbying them. That's the kind of thing you actually don't want them to do. So they advertise that they're working on sustainability, and yes, they actually invest in sustainability already. They have some clean energy plants, but they should do more. So how can we get them to do more? How can we get them not to hand out their money back to investors by buying shares, but to just build more wind farms, solar parks, and so on? First of all, of course, there is governments. They can put in place regulations. They can put in place climate taxes like carbon taxes. They can stop, some of them actually are subsidizing fossil fuels. They can stop that. But there is also a role for investors. And that's, of course, where we have to, what we're doing here. We're looking at what is investing for the climate. Because the investors are shareholders, owners of oil companies. The first question, of course, is, do investors actually care about climate risk? This is a slide that comes straight out of a lecture I do in Tilburg, and this is a survey of institutional investors. And they were asked, what is your key risk when you go out investing? Obviously, financial risk is their first concern, the first thing they think about, the returns versus risk. The second is operating risk. Are there any administrative issues? What about fraud risk, IT risk, cybersecurity risk, all kinds of risks that are not directly related to the financial investment itself? And after that come things that are in sustainability, like governance risk. Can I own my ownership rights as a shareholder? Social risks, what about the labor conditions in the firms that I own? And climate risk. So yes, they care about it. It's not the first on the list. It's actually at the end of it, but the percentage differences behind financial risk are not that big. So yeah, they absolutely care about climate risk. Then the next question is, why do they care about climate risk? Well, they care about climate risk. This is from the same paper. They care about climate risk mainly for moral reasons, ethical reasons, and also because of the law. The top 3 reasons here are not about the money. The 4th and the 5th reasons are about the money. They talk about it's better for investment returns to be aware of the climate risk. So I don't want to be invested in a dying industry. So that's the kind of reasoning when they say, yeah, I have to think about it because it's beneficial for investment returns, it reduces overall portfolio risk and so on. So that's the other thing. That's why they care about it. Then the next thing, of course, is what can they do about it? Well, if you're a shareholder, you're a part owner of a company. So you can exercise your ownership rights. And what does that mean? First of all, you can talk to the companies that you own. You can talk to the management of those companies. That's called engagement. And you can also exercise your voting rights. So this is about engagement. So that investors tell a company like Shell to increase their clean energy production. And this is about voting. When you are a shareholder, you go to a shareholder meeting, you can vote basically for 2 things, which is, first of all, are the resolutions about the strategy of the company, so what are they doing? And the second is about who sits on the board of the company. And in this case, what you see here, of which you see here the headline, an activist hedge fund was successful in getting board members that are, let's say, pro-climate on the board of Exxon last year. So this is what you can do. You can do engagement, so you speak to them, and you can vote on a pro-climate way. That voting, here you see whether that's successful, that it is actually successful. It is, over the past few years, increasing that vote, so shareholder resolutions, in this case about the climate agreement of Paris, are being accepted at shareholder meetings. And when they are, then the company has to comply with that, and they have to set the standards that were spelled out at the Paris climate summits. And engagement, so speaking to to a company, having board meetings, sitting down with them and telling what you want from them, increase their investment in clean energy. This is another paper who talks about whether that's actually successful. So for voting, we know it's successful, previous slide. What about engagement? In this paper, the biggest investors around the world, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they engage more, so they talk to those companies more, if they can get better or larger reduction in carbon emissions. And of course, they come from the larger firms, but also when they have a larger stake in those firms. And these guys are very big. BlackRock is the largest investment management company in the world. They invest $10 trillion of assets on behalf of others, on behalf of their clients, like pension funds, but also retail, like you and I. 10 trillion, that's $10 million, that's enormous. And State Street and Vanguard also are in the trillions. So they often have, 5% or 7% of the shares of a single company on their own. And that's what this shows here. When they do engagement, the bigger their share is, the more likely it is that the company will actually reduce carbon emissions. And this is from a paper that's in a journal that in the academic financial world is a very top journal of financial economics. Like the other paper I showed just now, also in a top journal. So it matters that the size that you have as a shareholder in the company that we're talking about, it matters if you are bigger, they are more likely to listen to you. And that makes sense. Because if you're a big investor, they also need you to vote for shareholder resolutions, like the board composition resolutions. So that's what investors can do. They can speak to company management and they can vote pro-climate in shareholder meetings. So let's talk about the opposite view. The opposite view is oil and gas companies, they're in the polluting business. You should not own their shares, you should oppose them. That's what these people are saying to ABP, the pension fund. You should oppose them. Don't own their shares and tell them to stop pumping oil. Well, if you do that, as an investor, if you sell your shares to someone else, what is that person going to do with it? Or who is that person? Is that person concerned about the climate? Is he going to be voting in shareholder meetings or not? It doesn't involve the company itself either, if you sell your shares. Think of it like buying a ticket to a pop concert. If after a week you decide to sell it to someone else, the musicians already got their money, right? It's not going to change anything to them. So because these firms don't need money, actually they're buying back their own shares, right? Because they don't need money, it doesn't concern them when owner A moves into owner B. It doesn't concern them. They don't have to care about that. Actually, if you sell your shares, as ABP has now said that they will end up with either somebody who might care less about the climate or by the company itself. But then they say, and even ABP, even though they are big, they are not as big as BlackRock and so on. They own maybe, $100 million worth of shares in an oil company, which sounds like a lot of money, but you've seen the figures, that's actually tiny. So they say, well, they're not going to listen to me, right? I'm like the mouse talking to an elephant. I'm too small, I'm not relevant. And that's a pity. That's a pity because if you're working together, so then you can raise your voice on behalf of many investors, like the asset management companies do, or you can hire somebody to do that for you, or to organize that, and then you become bigger, and then it will work. So here on the right-hand side are two pension funds who are saying, well, we need this climate, we need climate change to stop, and we're going to do our utmost to get the fossil fuel companies to invest more in clean energy and to stop with the other, the bad practices. But we're not selling our shares. On the left-hand side, they are saying, we are selling our shares. So actually, I think that's a pity, because it is a rift between those, and because of that rift, they are not as big and as influential as they could be. when they work together and form a united front towards the fossil fuel companies. And that's, I think, where we have to conclude that it's a bit like Gulliver in Lilliput. Gulliver, the oil companies, Lilliput, the pension funds, the small ones, if they all work together, however they do it, if they do it in coordination or if they hired somebody to do this, they can speak to the oil companies and improve their policies towards a cleaner climate and towards cleaner energy production. And with that, thank you, and I would like to kindly take your questions.
Well, Mr. Kragt, thank you very much for your talk. And yeah, very interesting insight. And it was very new for me, maybe also for you here in the audience, and maybe also for the people watching online. Yeah, we do have time for some questions, so feel free to raise your hand. We have a catchbox microphone that will come your way, and also for the people who are watching online, you can leave your question in the chat. Let's start first here in the audience. I see a hand going up there in the middle, so if you could throw the mic that way. And yeah, that's a good catch. There's a black dot, and keep it close to your mouth, and we can hear you.
So you say, well, don't sell your shares if you want to influence a company. But if you sell your shares, you also have money now to invest in another company, which can be competing with that first company. So that would also be a way to convince another company to do something else, to influence the opposing companies.
So if you sell your shares, you as the investor, you have the money and you can do something else with it, which could be clean investing. That's absolutely true. And there's nothing, of course, that should stop you from that. And a lot of companies actually work that way. They go into the market and find new investors.
That was maybe the reason for ABP.
No. I mean,
Okay.
this is generally a development.
Okay.
And generally, that's a development that you see. So, for example, quite a few of the windmill parks that are in the North Sea at the moment are owned by pension funds. But they didn't have to sell their shares in the oil companies to get to do that. So, the only thing that you do is if you sell shares in firms is you give up your ownership. And with that ownership come rights that I just discussed.
But similarly, if you are, let's say, maybe 20% ownership of a company, which of maybe Shell, then you might not be able to convince them to do something else. But if you sell your shares and then invest in another company, which is 100% agreeing with you, then you have far more power.
Yeah, but is that other company capable of making an investment in, for example, carbon capture? Can they deal with those things, the four things that I mentioned, particularly the uncertainty and the technical issues? Can they? Maybe. Some of them will. I'm not saying that it's only going to be the major oil companies who can do this. I'm saying they should do more than they are doing now. And the rest, also, of course, also should happen, right?
I saw a hand going up behind you, and that person maybe has a related question. Yeah, good.
Okay, yeah. I have two smaller questions. First is, you talked about the effect of selling or not selling your shares, but you, in my opinion, you just completely passed the point of price fluctuations and the fact that if you sell your shares, the price drops, and that also influences the policies of companies, especially because the higher managers are, a lot of their bonuses are based on the share of the price shares.
Yeah.
Is that true?
The question is clear, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
If you are a manager of an oil company, then you get bonuses paid out either in options or in shares. US usually in shares. So you are thinking about the selling moment only now. You're thinking about that they want as high a price as possible, because they want to sell them. But they also get allotted shares. And for that, it's best for the price to be as low as possible. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that means that for them, it depends. What matters is whether it moves from the point where they get them, when it moves up. But if they are in a job for, let's say, 10 years, then they are going to be fine for the prices to go down in, say, in year 5 or in year 6, because they're going to be, being paid out in year 10. So it's not necessarily it's basically not the case that it's only the selling moment that matters to them. The difference between the buying and the selling, the allotment and the selling is what matters.
Okay. And the other part was you're giving the oil companies a lot of responsibility in energy transition. And how do you get that in line with the behavior we have seen in Groningen, Nigeria, the Gulf of Mexico?
No, I agree. Yeah, that's appalling. So that's exactly what shareholders should do and speak to these companies about, right? They should say that they should change their strategies and their policies in those countries and in their behavior. Also, for example, which is something that is striking, is about the marketing that they do, right? Some of them saying, look, we are improving the fuel efficiency of our gas, for example. That's a marketing ploy. Right? It looks green, but it is not green. So as an investor, you can speak to those companies and say you should stop that. Instead, you spend that money you spend on that into clean energy production.
But
okay, thank you for your question and also answering the question. There's also, I see some more hands going up here, and there's also a question in the chat that's also about influence by individuals, and the person in the chat is saying, my understanding is that there needs to be a combination of organizations for them to hold influence of such a large company. In that case, how can individuals hold influence to such large companies?
Yeah.
So,
how can individuals influence that, right? So this slide here, that's by Follow This. And Follow This is a charity that is voting on behalf of individual shareholders and is engaging with companies, and they get speaking time in shareholder meetings where they get these shareholder resolutions accepted. So even if you only own a couple of shares of an individual company, you can still go to a charity like this and get yourself represented. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to find an asset manager that you agree with their policies and then let them invest on behalf of on your behalf.
yeah.
So you let the work do for you, and there are lots of organizations that can do that.
Okay, so those are two good options. But what about the people working, for example, at ABP? What can they do? Just the employees?
The employees of ABP,
Yeah.
they can do this as well, right?
Okay.
But they can also...
Is it easy for them, or is it...
Oh yeah, I mean, that ABP would do something as a company that's different from what they believe in personally. Yeah, they're not dictatorships. Yeah, you can do that. Sure. But ABP, of course, is a different matter because they're a large institution,
Yeah.
and they have the means to organize themselves so that they can be represented at shareholder meetings and do engagement. Although I say, as I said during the presentation, it's better if you do that with a large group.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, time is already up. If you do have a question, you can just come to the floor, and Jacques will still be here, so you can ask your question in person. I was told that someone from 𝑤𝑒rvingsdagen was taking some pictures for their website and socials and things like that. If you do not want to be in the picture, you can let them know here outside at the desk. Well, and for the people who are watching online, you can find the link to the registration form for the attendance registration right now in the chat. Well, thank you very much for being here, for your attention, and for listening to Jacques Kragt. So give him again a warm welcome, warm applause. And hope to see you next time. And on the 6th of April, we are going to discuss the IPCC report. So hope to see you there. Thank you and bye-bye.